Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I would like to explain to you some of the supplies that hopefully you have on hand. I have a variety of large and small paintbrushes. Some of them have a flat tip, and some of them are more fine. And this one over here is kind of a rounded tip. So we have an assortment of brushes. I have two paper plates. I have an empty paper plate in case I need more room for mixing. And then I have my palette. And while you are looking at my palette, now would be a good time to set up your palette and pour your paint. So I put the two warm colors of yellow and red next to each other, and then a pretty good amount of white. Most of my paint is fairly thick, and you'll be using water to thin it down. So just use whatever paint you have. The other colors I have on my palette today, I have a dark blue called phthalo blue, and just a little bit of black. So go ahead and set up your palette. I use paper plates, but if you have a plastic mixing tray or a wooden palette, whatever you have to do all of your mixing. So while you're getting that together, I also have at least two paper towels, and I have a rather large water cup, but if you just have a bowl, that's fine too. I have warm water in my bowl, but the temperature doesn't really matter all that much. And let's take a look at what I'm going to show you how to paint. This is my Van Gogh inspired pumpkin patch, and there are three basic elements that we're going to be working on today. The first one is the sky. And you'll notice the sky has those traditional swirls. And if you haven't seen Vincent van Gogh's Starry, Starry Night, I highly recommend you look it up on the internet. It's a painting that is in the public domain, so you're free to look at it and get ideas from it, as we often do. So the sky is going to be a major focus of our art. In addition to the wind and the comets and all the stars and activity that's going on in the sky, the crescent moon plays a pretty big part of how the sky relates to the colors in the pumpkins. So think about the shape that you would like to have with your moon. You could do a whole moon, you can do a crescent moon, or you can do a half moon. It's really up to you which type of moon you'd like. In fact, I don't know how many of you saw just the other day was a really huge harvest moon that came up about 9 o'clock. It's really beautiful. The other thing, the third part or focus of our painting is going to be the pumpkins. And I'd like you to think about how many pumpkins you'd like to make. In this example, I just have two, but if I made this larger one a little bit smaller, or put this pumpkin a little bit more behind the other one called overlapping, you certainly can put a third pumpkin. The number of pumpkins that you put in your painting is really up to you. And I'm also going to show you how to make the stems look three-dimensional, and then towards the end of the painting, we'll add in some pumpkin leaves and some curly vines, and it's going to be great. So hopefully your palette is ready, and I'm going to move my example out of the way, and let's get started with our painting. So the first thing that I would like you to do is take the largest brush that you have and dip it in your water and just drag it on the edge. I call that petting the kitty. I've been teaching elementary art for a number of years, so that's the way I say it, but just so you don't want a lot of drips, okay? And the first thing we're going to do is make what's called a tint, T-I-N-T, tint. Now, a tint is simply white plus a color that you want lighter in value. So I'm going to start with some white, a pretty good amount of white. And it's okay if it's kind of thick. And then I'm going to make a tint of blue. Now I highly recommend that you use just a little bit. So beep, just a little bit. I'm very into sound effects, so just a little bit, and then stir it up on your palette. And if it's too thick, like mine's a little gloppy, so I'm going to add a little bit more water to it. And I'm going to stir up my light blue. And once you have a pretty good light blue, not too dark because we're going to add a lot of color on top. And I'm going to then put some water on my brush because I really want my paint to spread around. Don't put so much water that it's drippy, but just enough so that you can spread the paint. And I'm going to decide where I want, or rather I should say how much sky I want. It kind of depends on how large you want your pumpkins. So just paint back and forth in slow, even brush strokes. And I would say cover about at least 2/3 of the canvas all the way across. Now, if you run out of paint, you could always make more. So I'm just going to paint the sky going back and forth. And if you want to make more, you just dip your brush into the white, stir it into the paint you already have, add a little dot of blue on your brush. Now, if it's a little darker or a little bit lighter than what you already have that you started with, no worries. It is okay because we are going to add a ton of color. This is just the base coat. And I am using my largest brush. So just have fun. You can go back and forth. If it gets a little dry, add a little water and just keep painting the sky. Just go back and forth, make it nice and smooth. You can see why I needed to make a lot of this initial color. Don't worry too much how the bottom of the sky looks because we are going to put pumpkins on top. Now the other thing you can do is you can start, if you want, I put some plain white on my brush and I just added in some streaks. You can already start to make the sky much more interesting. The other thing you can do to make the sky more interesting is to take some blue, and you notice I didn't really wash my brush. I just took some blue and I put it right on the largest brush I have, and I'm going to blend it in to the paint that's already there. And look how beautiful it is. Because my paint was already wet. Now, if you had trouble doing that, it means that your paint dried, and you can fix it very easily by putting some water on your brush and then put some color on your brush and then go back and forth. And now this new area is wet. And then I could go back, put some plain blue on top, and really blend. So get in some long brush strokes. Use your whole arm when you're painting. If the top is too dark, put a little white on your brush and put some color where you want it to go. And all of a sudden, your painting is starting to really shape up nice. So take a few minutes and get your sky going. I'm going to add in a little bit of water to the new blue that I just made. And again, I'm just stirring it up on my palette. And I'm going to get this section, which I didn't do yet. The best piece of advice I could give you for this is to relax into it. Maybe put on a little bit of music where you are. Add a little bit of water so it blends. And just have fun with getting all that color going in your sky. And we are going to let our sky dry before we start worrying about stars and the comets, and the moon will be one of the last things we do. So while you're painting, I'm going to go ahead and dip my brush in some water and the rest of the blue that I have. And I'm going to just do some touch-ups. Find some places where the paint did not completely cover the canvas. And you can kind of tell just by where I'm angling my paint now, where my 2 pumpkins are going to be. Or maybe I'll put 3, I haven't decided yet. That's the great thing about art. Sometimes you just figure it out as you go. So don't worry about this shape. We're going to cover all that up. Now, the other suggestion that I have is when you're done with a paintbrush, let it sit in your water cup right here. Because as you know, acrylic paint dries really fast. Wow, dries super fast. So I'm going to let you finish painting your sky for just a few minutes. If you are finished painting your sky, go ahead and wash your brush super well. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm just washing my brush, getting it nice and clean. And then I'm just going to wipe it on the paper towel. And as you can see, it wasn't super clean. So that means I need to wash it some more. Because you don't want to make your pumpkins green. Well, maybe you do, I don't know. There are people who want their pumpkins all different colors. You can be the judge of that. I'm going to stick with traditional colors of orange and yellow, maybe a little bit of brown and red thrown in there. So I'm just trying to get my brush nice and clean. And while I'm washing my brush, I'm letting that beautiful blue sky dry. Okay, so I'm going to leave this big brush of mine in the water. And I'm going to switch brushes. And I'm going to find a smaller brush. So what you put, whichever brush that you use for the shape of your pumpkins is up to you. I'm going to be using both the rounded brush and this smaller flat brush. So this is a 1/2 inch flat brush. And this is a number 8 round brush, but the numbers really don't matter. Just paint with whatever you have and what's good for you. So hopefully by now your sky is starting to settle in a little bit. And now I'm going to show you how to begin the pumpkins. Now, when we begin the pumpkins, we're going to start with basic sort of random oval shapes or random circle shapes. and then we're going to add in more details as we go. So the first thing we need to do is go back to our palette, and we need to make a secondary color of orange. So how do we do that? I always recommend that you start with the lighter color first when you're mixing. So get a good amount of yellow, like a really good amount of yellow on your brush. And I'm going to mix it on this plate so you can see. Get a really good amount of yellow. And again, I'm using really thick paint, but we can always thin it. So now this yellow brush is dirty, and I'm going to tap it into the red. So now I have red and yellow on my brush. And I'm going to stir it up. Now this paint that I'm using is very thick, so I will definitely be adding some water. Now if your paint is not dark enough, because I pretty much have a gold color, I'm going to make mine a little darker, so I'm going to add a little more orange. If your paint was too dark, you can start in a new place on your palette and add in some yellow again and a little bit of your dark color. So always start with the light color and make a medium orange. And make an orange that's pleasing to you. Okay? See that? Just a nice orange, basic orange color. Now, I'm going to start the oval shape, and it's a little tacky, but it's okay. If your paint is a little wet in a spot, figure out where it's not too wet, and then you can decide where you want your pumpkins. So I'm going to start right about here, and I'm going to make a pretty large oval. Now you'll notice that the orange is a little darker where it hits or overlaps the blue. So what you can do to help take care of that blue is you can then take your other brush, put a little bit of white on it, and you could just paint right over the blue. And the nice thing about acrylic paints is it's dries so fast, so you can blend really nicely and paint right on top. So now that I have that basic shape, I want to figure out where the stem is going to be. So instead of putting the stem right up here, I'm going to put it sort of down, so it will help make the pumpkin itself look more like rounded in 3D. So I'm going to make a little smile here. And then I'm just going to sort of draw right up into the sky a little bit where I want that pumpkin stem to be. Now don't worry, you're probably thinking, but pumpkin stems aren't orange. Don't worry about it. It's just, we're just getting our shapes put in place. Now from here, we're going to draw these curvy lines. So from the bottom of your stem, we're going to draw these curves. So it's starting to look like a pumpkin. So what I'm going to do now is take a little more red on my brush, and I'm going to make a dark orange. So I took the orange that I already had and I put a little bit of red into it, and I'm stirring it up, and I'm adding a little bit of water to it. Just make it kind of nice and creamy. And now I'm going to go over these lines again. See how it really stands out when it's darker? See that? This is called value. If you make these a dark value, it really makes everything stand out. So once you have that, let it dry. And I'm going to go over, I might make 3 pumpkins. We'll see how it goes. And then do that same procedure. So I wash my brush. And now I'm going to paint another pumpkin over here. So I'm going to do some overlapping. So I made a curve. Figure out where the smile is going to go. Make a little stem. And then make these big curvy shapes. And don't forget we're overlapping. So once you get to that other pumpkin, stop. Let me put this dark red here so you can see. You see how I stopped right here? And that's where the 2 pumpkins are overlapping. And I think I'm going to make another pumpkin right here. Make a smile. It's important to have the stem a little down low. Because if the stem is down low, you get to see the back of the pumpkin, and then it looks more 3-dimensional. And I'm going to rinse my brush. And I'm going to get that dark color. Don't worry about filling the pumpkin in. We'll get to that. Right now, I'm just blocking in where the shapes are going to go. Nice long curves, see? And if you need more color, make some more. Already looks very pumpkin-like, doesn't it? So now I'm going to wash my brushes. And I'm just going to let the lines of these pumpkins dry. If you're not done painting your curves, then just go ahead and paint your curves. And I painted the curves with a light orange first, and then I put a dark orange. And we're going to be going over the pumpkins a couple of times, just like we're going to be going over the sky a couple times. So take a few minutes and paint those beautiful pumpkins. Okay? And I'm just going to let those lines dry for a minute. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to take some yellow and I'm going to paint the first layer of my crescent moon. Now the blue should be totally dry before you do this. So definitely touch it with your hand. So the way to make the crescent moon is you make the letter C, and I'm adding some white. And then I just make it a little thicker. And if you have a pointy brush, you can make the edges pointier. I'm using white. Van Gogh painted very thick. So I'm trying to paint very thick as well. You might need to put a little bit of water on your brush just so you get it nice and pointy. And then I'm going back over it with some white. And I'm going to let that dry. So now I have a crescent moon. And I'm just washing my brush. I always take really good care of my brushes because brushes are the most expensive part. I get really good brushes, so brushes are usually the most expensive part of the whole process of painting. Okay, so we have the beginning of a really beautiful work of art. Now at this point, you could work on the sky a little bit and figure out where you want your stars to go. So I'm going to take my round brush and I'm going to put some white and a little bit of yellow and make a very, very pale yellow. And I'm making it pretty thick. And now I'm just going to decide where I want my stars to go. So I'm just making a little tiny circle. You can have a lot of stars, or you can have a few stars. I'll kind of leave that up to you as to how many stars you put on your paper because it's your starry, starry night. Now I'm going to go back to that flat brush that I had. So I'm taking this smaller flat brush and I want to wash it really good because I don't want my sky to be green. Maybe you do, I don't know. but I want my sky to be more blues and dark blues and purples. So wash your brush real good. And we are going to mix some dark blue, and we're going to start making the wind or the comet. So take some white, put it on your palette, then take more blue. So you're making kind of a dark blue, see? So make yourself a pile of blue. And then with the brush that's still got blue in it, dip it in the red and make a second circle. And I made a purplish blue here. It might look black on the camera, but if I add in a little bit of white to it, hopefully it looks purple to you and not gray. But if you mix together blue and red in varying degrees, you'll get yourself a purple. So I have a couple of colors now. I have dark blue, I have light blue, I have purple, and now you're going to start making the swirls. So I'm going to start with one star, and I'm going to make brush strokes, quick ones, and I'm going to go around one star, and I'm going to swirl it around to another star. These are kind of like dotted lines. And I could make some purple, and I'm going to follow that color again. These are sort of random brush strokes. And I could take some of the dark blue, and I can swirl that around. That's just plain blue at this point. I could take some white, put some white in. And I'm actually mixing the colors right on my canvas. I'm not paying too much attention to, oh, I have to touch this color or that color. We are just blending. You want to show the brush strokes for sure to show the brush strokes, because this is more of an impressionistic painting. And in Impressionism, they showed lots of brush strokes. And I'm adding more color. I'm adding some darker at the top. And now it really looks like swirling stars and moon. Really starting to look beautiful. And when you're done your first swirl, you can make another one. I think I'll put another star there real quick. And this is where a lot of your creativity and the fun, the sheer joy of painting comes in. Because there's really no right or wrong to how many swirls of color you have. I'm going to have a swirl coming right over here. Right in back of the moon. You play around with your brush strokes. They're just little tiny, like a dotted or a broken line. And if you want more color, you could get your palette again, and you could mix a dark blue and maybe a lot of red and make a really, really deep, dark purple. Now what I'm doing with my brush is I'm sort of twisting it back and forth so there's not too much paint. And then you can go back and put some dark where you want the dark to go. Put some dark right on top of the light. It's really starting to look beautiful. And just paint. That's the beauty of this. There's really no right or wrong. Just get how many swirls you want. And I'm just randomly putting as much color as I want in the sky. And I'm going to be filling up most of the sky with color like this. I usually put the darker colors at the top, so maybe more purples at the top and some lighter colors at the bottom. I didn't really even wash my brush, or I have not washed my brush, not much. It's okay. If there's too much color on your brush, then I would wash your brush, definitely. You don't want too much paint on your brush. And you'll notice that I have several layers of paint going on in the sky. I have light blue, I have medium blue, I have dark blue, I have purple, I have all sorts of beautiful color. And that's something that's really up to you, how much color you want to add to your painting. So I am going to continue working on the sky. And eventually you're going to fill in the sky with lots of brush strokes. Now towards the bottom, I'm using lighter blue. So I just took my blue brush and I'm just painting brush strokes. So you can leave some of that original color, that first layer of blue, you can leave some of that showing. And I'm going to put some light blue down at the bottom. And you could just paint and paint the sky as long as you want. I put some light blue here, and I'm just painting over it with a little bit of white and a little bit of water. A little bit of white and a little bit of water. And every once in a while, just look at your art and see where you want some more color. The more brush strokes you put in, the better it looks. The more overlapping of those brush strokes that you use, the better it looks. And don't forget to blend in some white. So put some streaks of white so you know where your swirls go. Now, at some point, you're going to have to let your sky dry a little bit. Sorry about that, phone rang. So I'm going to, at some point, let my sky dry. Figure out exactly where your swirls are. Feel like I need a little bit more dark in certain places. There, it's starting to look very swirly. So now I'm going to give my sky a rest, because at some point, if you paint too much, you won't be able to see it anymore. It gets kind of muddy. So I'm washing my brush really good, and I'm going to go back to the pumpkins. So I'm going to take this flat brush, I just washed it, and I have some of that orange left. I mixed together yellow, yellow and red, more yellow, and I stirred it up. And now I'm going to fill that pumpkin in. When you fill it in, you want to paint in curvy brush strokes. So these lines are curvy, so it makes sense when you're painting the pumpkin to follow the curves. So when I follow the curve, I'm going to go right around and fill in those areas of color. Now you're going to see that dark orange coming through, and that's good. You will definitely want to see that, because that helps define the ridges and edges of the pumpkin. So I'm filling in the pumpkin with orange now, and those dark areas I'm overlapping. Now you can also take some plain yellow on your brush, and you can make some bright spots or highlights. So I'm filling in these curvy shapes. Now, if some of your blue still shows through at the top, just put some white on your brush and cover it up. And then when the white dries, you can put the orange on. So what I'm doing now is I'm just going through and I'm using the orange and I'm filling in my pumpkin. See that? Isn't painting fun? I just love doing this. Just a few colors, reds and yellows and blues and whites, and you have a really beautiful painting. Now don't worry if some of your stem has gotten lost. We're going to go back through and we're going to add more color. So if you lost a little bit of where your pumpkin goes, where your stem is, don't worry, we're going to put it back. Because like I said, when we paint, especially with acrylics. It's all about layers of color. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just get it as good as you can get it. You noticed I put a little bit of white there. If I see a little bit of blue, I just put a little bit of white right in there. And then once that white dries, I can cover over it. So don't worry about if you see too much white. I'm just going to let that white stiffen up a little bit, get a little sticky. Put a little water on my brush. And I'm following the contour, the curves of my pumpkins. I'm making them curvy. And when you do that, it really looks round. So I ran out of orange. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take some yellow. And I'm going to take some red. And I'm going to stir it up. And I'm going to make an orange. Now you could make darker orange. And you could make lighter orange. If you want your orange a little darker, add more red. And you can highlight some of these. Just put a little highlights on some of these curves. You notice what I'm doing? I'm overlapping. I'm putting color on top of color. And it doesn't have to be all the way down. It's just a little bit of extra color on top. So I'm adding these beautiful layers of color. I dropped my paintbrush. Sorry about that. So I'm making these curves of color. And you can take some yellow and you can make some highlights. You don't really want it just full of stripes either. That's another thing. You don't want it to look super stripy. So after a while, you're just going back and forth with the colors in curves, and you're following these contours, and it's really starting to look very pumpkin-y. Take your time and figure out what curves you want to emphasize, which curves want to be darker, which parts want to be lighter. If it's a little thick, do what I just did and add some water to it. See that? I'm just making these beautiful curves. You can take some yellow and stir up some yellow. And you could put some yellowy orange on some of your curves. So some of your curves can be dark. Some of them can be light. Depends where the light is hitting it. And just blend all those colors together. And it's really starting to look Very pumpkin-y, don't you think? I'm going to wash my brush, and I'm going to let you paint your edges for just a minute. Just trying to get the paint. I dropped some on my slacks, but a little bit of water, it's all good. So what I've done is I have painted lots of curves on the pumpkin. I've used some reddish orange here and some highlights of orange, a lighter orange here, and I'm going to let that dry now. So now you can take your small brush, and we're going to use some of that orange, and I'm going to just highlight the skies a little, the stars a little bit. So now I'm going to come over here with my small brush, and I'm painting little dashes of color. So with my small brush, I'm going to go back and find my stars, and hopefully by now most of your sky should be dry. And if it's not, just give it a few minutes. And I'm adding orange around my little stars with the small brush. This is a detail, but it really brings out the color in the sky. And it also creates a sense of, well, there's orange up in the sky and now there's orange here. And it brings your eye sort of all over the page. So when you repeat colors like that, it makes your brain say, oh, there's orange over there. And there's some more over there. So it causes you to look all over the canvas. So now I'm going to take my smallest brush again, and I'm going to use a little bit of red and just a little teeny tiny dots or dashes of color. Very carefully. I am actually using my pinky to balance and to steady my hand. It's okay if you don't see all of the red when you overlap it into some of your purple areas. It's okay. We're just adding a little bit of color, sort of like a spice. You want these lines to be small, so I'm using the thinnest, smallest brush that I have. And I'm going pretty slow with this. Little tiny dashes of color around your stars. And while I'm doing this, I'm letting the pumpkins dry. And then I could put more color and bring out the color of the stems. So don't worry about the stems. You thought I forgot the stems. I know they're there. I'm just letting all that color dry. Now, you can also wash that brush, and you could start working on this colors around the moon as well. So I'm going to mix some light yellow and I'm going to make some dashes of color around my crescent moon. See that? Now you can also, if you want, you can add in a little bit of orange to some of your moon. I added kind of a gold color. So I just mixed a little bit of orange right into that yellow, and I made gold. Let's see what happens if I put in a little tiny bit of red here. Just a little bit. Look at that. A little bit of color. Washing my brush, and I'm letting it dry for a few minutes. So you have to sort of look and see, well, what do I need to do now? So I'm going to take just one of my fingers, and I'm going to touch and see, are my pumpkins dry enough now? Yeah, I think they're okay. If no color comes on your skin, that means your paint is dry enough. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a flat brush and I'm going to put a little bit of white on my paintbrush. And I'm going to first paint a little bit of white exactly where I want my stems to go. We're not going to leave them white. We're just getting rid of that blue. Don't forget the smile down here. The stem should really be a smile at the end, a curve. You don't want this line here flat. So if you made this curvy, it really gives the appearance of roundness. So make a smile, and your stem will look much more realistic. And also you'll notice that my stems sorry about that. Everybody's calling me today. So make your curve. I think I'll turn my phone off. That will help. There we go. So what I'm doing is I took some white and I am making that curve. See that? Look at that. Now, you know what we're going to do. We're going to make the color now for the stem. So I'm going to take that same brush. I'm going to let that white dry. I'm going to take some yellow. Hopefully you have some clean yellow. If you don't have any clean yellow, don't worry about it. Just go ahead and pour yourself a little more yellow, because you don't want orange into your yellow. You actually want yellow. So take some yellow and then take a little bit of blue, and you have yourself a green. Now I want mine a little darker. So I added a little bit more. I added a little bit more blue to the green. Now sometimes if you want to tone down your green, like let's say it's really like amazingly green, you can tone it down by adding a real tiny dot of red to it. And that will tone it down. It's when you use, it's called a complementary color. Red and green are opposite each other on the color wheel. But if you put too much red in your green and you now have brown, don't worry. Just wash your brush. Take some green or take some yellow and try make your beautiful green again, and don't worry about that. Green is a tricky color. So here I have light green and dark green, which is actually perfect. So now I have both. And then you can start putting streaks in your stem. You can use the light green. Now, I don't know how many pumpkins you made. Maybe you have just 2. Maybe you have 3. I'm going to use my small brush, and I'm going to get some of that dark green, and I'm going to paint these lines. You want it to look kind of streaky. So I'm taking my large brush and some water, thin it down a little bit. And I have those lines. Now here's what I suggest you do. Take your yellow, make some green, then take a little bit more red than you think you need, and a little touch of black. So you want a really dark, sort of muddy looking green. And if you make army green, perfect. So tone down the green with a little bit of red. And if it's too dark, add back a little bit of yellow and a little bit of blue and get an army green going. Just a dark, sort of muddy green. And then twist your brush and twist it, add a little water. You have an army green with your thin brush and water. And now I'm going to add the streaks to the pumpkin. And I'm just putting some lines of color here. Just make it so it's dark and light. I'm barely touching the canvas. And I'm also trying to make these kind of bumps. See that? It just gives it a little bit more shape when you flare it out right at the end of that smile. So come down and make these flares color. These are just details that I'm adding to the stem. So it should look pretty streaky. And then you could wash your brush and you could fill in any areas of color that you need with the light yellow, the light green. Just play around with your color to get the top of the stem going. And I have light green at the top. You could put a little oval, and that makes the top of the pumpkin a little 3D. See that? Just real subtle, flat oval. Take your time. Fill in your color wherever you need to. So now I'm judging my art and I'm thinking, well, where do I need more color? Do I need it darker in some spots? Do I need it lighter in some spots? Is there anywhere in my canvas where I see the background and I need to do some touch-ups? Do I want to make some medium green? Some green with just blue in it, so it's a bluish turquoisey green. Get a nice rich color going here. A lot of beautiful color. Ooh, that's a nice color. I like that. See that? I just made a whole new color. Isn't that beautiful? Isn't painting fun? Just love to do this. I hope you're having as much fun as I am. I'm sure you're doing a great job. Look at that. We started out with a white canvas, and look what we have now. Something really pretty. So I'm washing my brush, and what I'm going to do now is make brown for you. So if you've never made brown, this is your opportunity. I'm going to take my small brush and I'm going to make an area of orange. And I'm going to take a little bit of blue and stir it up. And then I'm going to take some red, a lot of red. So the process for making brown was I started with orange, I added blue, and then I put more red in it. And I made brown. So play around with your brown. And I'm using my finished brush. So I'm going to show you how to make brown one more time, because that is a tricky color to make. So I started with yellow. I'm putting some red in, and I made orange. Then with that orange, I'm going to take blue and I'm going to stir it in, and now it probably looks green to you. So then you're going to take some red and you're going to put it into this muddy green. And you have brown. If you use a lot of red, you end up with a really earthy, rich brown. If you use a little bit of red, it'll be more of an army brown. I actually like that color. So I'm going to use a little bit of brown, and I just want to show you this finished one so you can see what I'm going to do. I've found some places where the curves are, and I'm going to put very thin lines, a little tiny bit, just a little bit on top of that dark red. And if you don't want to do this, then you don't have to do it. But I'm just adding a little bit of color. I've got water on my brush. I've got that beautiful earthy brown. I'm going to use my pinky, and I'm just going to add a little bit of brush strokes. And it's going to highlight some of the areas of the pumpkin that are these curves. A really thin brush, lots of water. Just like that. Take your time. And it doesn't even have to go all the way down. I'm adding a little bit more water. Just a few little brush strokes. Very thin. Very, very thin. Figure out where you had that original dark red and just put some color. Not a lot. Just a few little highlights of this dark color. And it really brings out the roundness of the pumpkin. Thin lines. So barely touched canvas when you're making these thin lines. And make your paint nice and watery. You don't want it to drip, but you want it thin enough that you can make these little curves of color. This takes a little bit of practice, so don't feel bad if it's a little challenging at first. You will definitely get the hang of it. That really stands out now with the dark, doesn't it? Just love that. Okay, so I'm going to let that dry for a minute. And I'm going to make some really dark green. And I might take a little bit of that brown even. Yeah, that's it. Take a little bit of your brown and stir it into some green. And now figure out which side of your pumpkin stem you want really dark. And then add in some of that dark green. And if you do that, it really makes the stems look round. So think about how many layers of color we've put on this stem. Look at that. It's starting to look beautiful, don't you think? I know yours is beautiful. I'm going to wash that brush, but I love that color, so I'm going to keep that color handy. I'm going to go back to one of my flat brushes, and I'm just going to paint some of the leaves. So I'll show you some of the leaves and stems that I did on this one. And pumpkin leaves are actually really, really, really large. In fact, when I was growing pumpkins, they kind of took over my whole garden, the leaves. But I'm going to make these leaves a little bit smaller just so that you can see the green, and then we can add in some of these beautiful curves. So I'm going to you want to add a little bit of white so it covers up the orange. And then you can make some more green. Make as many leaves as you want. I just made these big shapes and they're pointy. And what I like to do with leaves is I usually leave one part of the leaf dark and one part light. Don't be afraid to get dark, because when you add in that dark, it really makes the light part just make the whole thing pop. So go ahead and get dark and just blend it all in. Let's make another leaf here. Just some curves. Make it pointy at the end. I'm going to fill in some yellow and some white. Just in the middle, I'm going to blend it all in. Then the edges of my leaf are dark, and then the inside is light. And I can even add in some more yellow. Just play around with your colors. See what looks good to you. Here's some more of that dark. Oh yeah. If you get that dark in these leaves and you blend it, and I'm just wiggling the brush, look how beautiful that is. Oh, just love that. I hope you're having as much fun as I am doing this. Let's make some smaller leaves here. I'll make 3 leaves here. Don't forget the dark. The dark really sets it up. It makes it really pop. And you can add in some yellow. So you have light and dark right in your leaves. How beautiful. Put some white in the middle. So as you can see, we did so much overlapping of color. And that's what's really exciting about acrylic paints, is that you could overlap lots of color in a very short amount of time because the paint dries so quickly. You can put in some yellow. I'm kind of running out of green. I need to make some more. And your leaves don't have to all be the same color either. Give your art some variety. Beautiful. I'm going to take my round brush and I'm going to really go, I'm going to mix up some yellow and some blue. In fact, I hardly have any yellow left, but I could get more if I want some. And I'm going to put some water on your brush and I'm going to twirl it. And now I'm going to make some stems. You can curl it. Look at that. How beautiful. How beautiful. Make some curls. Make some curls go up. Don't be afraid to go right into that sky. It's okay. I need to get more yellow. So then you could add some highlights with yellow to your curly vines. Make some thick, make some thin. You could even take some white and you can put a little bit of white in some places. This is where the finishing really is so beautiful. Just a little bit of white in some places. I'm using very little pressure when I make these curves. I'm adding a little tiny bit of white in places. Just sort of finish it off. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful? So I hope you had as much fun as I did painting this pumpkin patch picture. And of course, the last thing we want to do is take a small brush. Here it is. And take a little bit of black and a little bit of blue Make a color that you like, maybe a little purple in there. Stir it all up, get sort of a brown color, whichever color you like. Maybe some people always sign their name in red. I try to sign my name in a color that I've already used. So I'm using a dark brown, and I'm just going to sign my name here. I use the smallest brush I have for signing my name. Painting your name is a little tricky, but if you use a small brush and some water, there. So I hope you enjoyed painting a Van Gogh pumpkin patch with me. And before we go, just step back from your work and admire what a great job you did. And keep on painting. And it was my pleasure to share this with you today.